could help us with our relationships with spouses or with partners. It could help us with our children. It could help us stay connected as our children get older and we have to change our parenting style. It could help us if we become grandmas and grandpas one day. So all the way through, it just helps us again to be the very best version of ourselves.
In today's episode, I will be talking about PTSD, and I'll be speaking to Tanya Johnson, a child psychologist. She will be educating us more about this very topic. So please stay tuned and keep on watching. Do not forget to subscribe, like, and share, and leave a comment. Hello, Tanya.
Hi. Hi, Alicia.
Welcome to Ailey Fashion Lovers Chat Show.
Thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to be here.
Thank you very much for taking your time to answer my call. Thank you so much.
Oh, so welcome.
It's been so kind of you.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
So Tanya, can you tell my audience about yourself? What do you do, please?
Yeah. So I am a registered psychologist in Canada. I am also a registered play therapist, and I'm the co-founder of the Institute of Child Psychology. Basically, the Institute of Child Psychology educates parents and professionals on really just any issues pertaining to children's mental health, how to help our kids be the very best version of themselves.
That's really, really good. So Tanya, today I brought you in here so we can talk about PTSD. Mm-hmm. So few weeks ago, should I say a few days ago, was Mental Health Awareness Week. And we booked a call to have a word with you, as I had a mother telling me about the depression she went through during her pregnancy and after childbirth. Mm-hmm. So this is why you've come to this platform, in order to educate us more about this very issue that few people do overlook or take for granted. Mm-hmm. So I'll let you do the talking, so you can please guide us through.
Beautiful. So when we look at trauma can come in many different forms. So it can be a childbirth experience, it can be one big experience like a car accident or having someone close to us pass away. So we can have big traumas. Sometimes we can have little traumas too. We call those little T's. Little traumas are small events that are traumatic, that accumulate over time and can eventually have the same impact as one really, really big trauma in our lives. And when we go through a trauma, it literally desensitizes all of our core stabilities. It shifts everything for us. Suddenly we start really guessing, who are we? Who are other people? Is the world safe? Is the world not safe? It basically shakes us to our core. Yeah, it's big. It's huge. Yeah. Yeah. Alicia, I think one of the hard things with trauma is that very often it's expressed in different ways. So we'll see people might get depressed, they might get anxious, they might start to numb out through food or shopping or drugs or alcohol. And very often we end up focusing on their anxiety or their depression or their substance use, when really, when we look at what's actually happening underneath, it's the trauma.
Wow.
Yeah.
This is really big.
It's huge. Absolutely huge.
So how do we spot this? What are the signs we need to look out for when we're experiencing this?
Yeah, so if there is an identifiable event, so like let's say a car accident, so if there's an identifiable event, we really want to watch a child, particularly in those first 3 months after an event. And what they're going to probably be doing after that first 3 months is really trying to work out meaning around the event. So right after the event happens, they will very often ask very concrete questions about the event, but it takes time. As time passes, they begin to process it on a deeper level. And we'll often see that they'll start reenacting it through their play. So their play themes can become quite destructive or quite rigid. Or quite dark, as we might see it in their play, we might see it in their sleep, they might be sad. Very often we'll see that they start to avoid things like school or going to go and see friends. My bias is that if there is an identifiable traumatic event, my bias is always that we get kids into therapy as quickly as possible, because early intervention is critical. So if we can work with a child for, let's say, 4 or 5 sessions, it's way easier than working with them years later and having to do 15 or 20 sessions when it's compounded. It's the same for an adult. Go in and see a therapist if you have that, or a community support worker. Go in and talk to somebody. Some people go to spiritual leaders like a priest, whoever is your type of healer. To me, when you go, wow, that really shook me up, if we can talk to somebody quickly, it's always way better than waiting. But really, as I said, because it shakes everything, I've explained what we might see with kids, but it's the same with adults too. So with adults, we start to see less interest in going to work, hanging out with friends, social activities. We might see people numbing out. Basically, we'll see people going through their day like robots, but very often the passion is gone, that drive, because something inside is really shaken.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah. So one more thing to say on that is that people respond differently. So some people will go into what we call hyperarousal, where they just have this adrenaline going all of the time. So they're highly anxious. They're really hypervigilant. What's happening? Am I safe? Am I not safe? There's lots of energy, lots of cortisol going all of the time. And then we have other people who go into hypoarousal, which is basically that shutdown. I often think of them as my tertial clients. So basically, don't want to go to work, don't want to go to school, don't want to see friends. And we will see that people will shift between the two states, but we generally have one type of way of responding to a trauma. So some people will go up, and then other people will shut down.
Wow.
Yeah.
This is quite magical. Wow. It's good to hear from a professional's view, because when this kind of thing happen, we just take it for granted, like, oh yeah, it's gonna pass away. But actually it could last longer in a person's mind in their lifetime, and it might contribute to few negative factor in their life.
100%. And we know that when trauma stays with us, when we aren't able to work through that trauma, that it impacts us physically, it impacts us psychologically, it impacts us socially. So it's really important to work with those feelings so that they don't become toxic for us.
Wow.
Alicia, you're so right. I think so often we go like, oh, it's fine, I'll get over it, or I just need a little bit of time. But I also think that as a society, as we move forward, or as a civilization, as we move forward, I'm hoping that in the same way as when we get a really sore throat and we go to the doctor, it's going to be the same thing. Wow, I went through something big. I need to go and talk to somebody who can help me. And we're not doing that yet, but I'm hoping it's going to become more normalized. That's just what we do when something happens to us.
Wow. Do you know, I want us to talk more about this. So this is why I had the passion to bring somebody magical like you here, to come and educate the world, educate the community, educate the society. Because, you know, like we mentioned earlier, we just take things for granted, thinking, don't worry, it's going to pass by. But actually, if we don't speak to somebody like you, we'll never understand the main concept of it and how to deal with it.
100%, absolutely. And you know, it's part of that older generational thinking where it was be strong, and that's the last thing that we need. We actually need to be real and actually work with those feelings, because when we leave those feelings to sit, they become toxic.
Wow. Do you know, you just mentioned something now, saying if we leave, you know, like in the olden days, gone are the days, we'll be told, oh, don't worry about it, it's gonna pass you. Be strong. That's the word you used. Recently, I was speaking to a friend of mine. You say this very friend, he's like highly, when you say highly educated and a very important person in the society. He's worked with, you know, name the business before, you know, and this person called me and confided in me, telling me how his childhood has impacted in his life. Like, because when things happen, then when he wants to express his feelings to say, oh, this is the way I feel, they'll say, oh, don't bother about it. Oh, don't bother about it. And I tell you what, this has affected him in such a way that he lost his first marriage.
Mm-hmm.
Because it took her for granted. Each time the relationship is trying to say, the marriage is trying to say, oh, this is the way I feel, or I need to talk to you, he just brushed it aside and said, oh, don't bother.
Yeah.
Only understood the concept of what has happened to him in the past, how he was being brought up and raised up, when he lost his marriage. He lost his marriage, which he's really worked hard for.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Then he told me if the issue of how he felt, he's been feeling when he was younger, if it had been dealt with properly, then, it wouldn't have stayed in him like that. Because at the moment, he says, what he has recognized is it takes people for granted.
Yeah.
And it takes things in general for granted. Things whereby you need to devote your time to talk about. He just bluffs it around to say, oh, I'm not bothered. So people think he's a bit full of himself.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Am I right that if it's not been looked into, if we don't come and speak to people like you, a psychologist, we would never get through it easily.
100%. Yeah. And Alicia, it's an older study, but there's a study called the Adverse Childhood Experiences Study. And it's exactly what you're talking about, is that when they've actually studied that when we have traumas, and particularly when those traumas accumulate, we can look at those traumas from when we're younger and actually connect them to our lifestyle habits when we're in our 40s, 50s, 60s, and go, actually, it accounts for social issues like you're talking about here, or how we look after our bodies can all be connected back to earlier traumas in our lives that weren't dealt with.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. It's amazing.
Wow. So, do you know about this trauma that we're talking about? How does it relate to mothers who are pregnant or who has had a baby? How is it connected? Can you expatiate better for me, please?
So, Alicia, I think you mentioned the subject earlier. What sort of trauma would we be looking at for that person that you were speaking about earlier? I don't know if you can share her story, but it would depend on what sort of trauma we're looking at. Are we looking at birth trauma here? What are we looking at?
I think her story is she was filled with anxiety, a bit of depression, not having like a self-worth anymore, thinking, oh my goodness, just like, oh, did I have this baby? Oh, I can't really be bothered. You see what I mean?
Totally. Yeah. So, and I would be so interested to actually talk to her, but it sounds to me, without having had the opportunity to do that it would probably be something more aligned with, unless it was a traumatic birth, it sounds like she's probably struggling with postpartum depression at that point, or even maternal exhaustion. So our postpartum depression, many people experience baby blues. So it's that hormonal drop after baby, 4 days afterwards, we're in tears, and it takes a little while, and then we come back and go, oh, okay, this is my new normal. We're exhausted, a whole lot of things have shifted. But with something like postpartum depression, those baby blues don't go away. It stays with us. And many moms, when they talk to me, will say they recognize that they're a mom, that their life has changed, but it just feels as if they're completely numb. Other clients have said to me that they sometimes feel as if they're almost dead inside. They're looking at this child going, what next? Some moms will say to me that they don't feel connected to the baby. They love the baby, but they don't feel connected to the baby. It's really difficult. And my biggest advice to moms, and there's another part to this, but my biggest advice to moms is, again, get help as quickly as possible, because those first few years of a baby's life, I'm an attachment psychologist, but those first few years of a baby's life is really important in terms of the attachment process. And so we need to make sure that mum is healthy, and all of our resources need to go into mum, because if mum is healthy, then baby is healthy. And so often we focus on the baby. What does the baby need? What resources does the baby need? But really we have to shift to go, what does mom need? Because if mom is okay, then more than likely baby is going to be okay. So really it's a shift from being a baby focused society to being not even a mom, but being the primary caregiver. That's sometimes a dad or grandma, but really looking at who is that primary caregiver and what resources can we pour into this primary caregiver so that they can be the very best that they can be for baby. I feel with mums, often there's shame around saying that I'm struggling or I'm not feeling connected to my baby, because there's such societal push of, oh, this is what a mom looks like, this is what a mom should do, this is how a mom should feel, all of these shoulds. And all of those shoulds end up making moms often feel really shamed. And so they hide what they're feeling and they don't get the help that they need. And so it's not just the moms, it's society as a whole that we need to change. We have to change our message around parenting.
Good, good. That's really that's really, really good. So, if we, if you find someone experiencing this now, how can you mentioned we need to consult, a psychologist, speak to a psychologist, a primary health giver.
Yeah.
How about, because I tell you, some mothers panic for the fact that they think if they express their pain or what they are experiencing to a primary health giver, they panic thinking their children or their child will be taken away from them.
Absolutely. So
from the authority.
Yeah, totally. So it's difficult. I don't want to speak on I know you're calling me from London, so I don't want to speak across
Yeah, I understand.
Yeah, but I know here in Canada where we are, supports are always in place for moms. So we're very family orientated, and whether it's a social worker or psychologists, and like I said, it doesn't always have to be a psychologist, it just has to be a trusted professional. But really the emphasis is on how do we help this mom be with their child. And of course that's different in different places, but that's what it is here.
So you advise mothers not to feel shy about it, just talk about it. Don't panic. They shouldn't panic too much thinking, oh, they'll take my baby away. Just go for it. At least you've tried.
Absolutely. And this is your life, this is your child's life, and to stay in this space of feeling numbed out or to feel shame for years on end, this is your life. So it's, I know that your show is all about empowerment, to really go, it doesn't matter if that judgment is there or if that pushback is there or if somebody's giving me one of those awful shoulds. This is your life, and let's step forward into going, no, I need more support and I'm not getting enough support right now.
Good. Thank you very much. Is there anything you would like to recommend? Any book or something, or
Yeah, so I would say right now, for those of you who are interested, Dr. Bruce Perry, it's Bruce and then Perry, Perry. He is probably a leading trauma psychologist right now. If you go onto his website, he has wonderful, wonderful resources, free resources too, on his website. And then we also have a really great trauma program for parents and for caregivers that's online as well, that people take it all over the whole world. So if people are interested, that's a great way to really it educates you, and then it also gives you the tools and strategies on what to actually do if you have a child who is struggling with trauma.
Wow. Okay. So do you think this very topic, is it only restricted to mothers only?
No, absolutely not. Anybody. If you are a human being, it's likely that you have either been impacted or will be impacted by a traumatic event. Yeah, not just moms.
Okay. Do you know, from my point, I think men need to be educated as well in terms of this. We need to create more awareness for men, for new fathers or upcoming fathers, upcoming moms, or even teenagers as well.
Absolutely. I talk a lot about emotional resiliency, and really that this is something to our girls and our boys. We need to start talking about this to them, about different emotional states, different feelings, what happens when we come across something really, really difficult in our lives. These need to be discussions that we're focusing on right from the time our kids are little, so that we are raising boys and girls who are more emotionally competent and more emotionally available. One of my real heart moments is I had an 85-year-old grandma come in and start talking about trauma for the first time in her life. And she just wanted to resolve some of that at the end of her life. And we had to unpack so much baggage because she had held it for so long, but there was healing in that.
Oh.
So, yeah, it doesn't matter, male, female, young, old. Like I said, we all will go through a trauma. And I think we all deserve the healing. We're all worth the healing.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Are there any different types of trauma, or is it just
there's 100% different types of trauma, but basically I hesitate a little bit to classify it, because I don't want somebody to go through something and go like, oh, that wasn't in one of the categories. So I think instead of, we get intergenerational trauma, we get war trauma, we get birth trauma. There's lots of different categories. But I think instead of trying to put it into category, I would rather say, if something happens to you, and it doesn't matter what it is, if something happens to you and you feel unsettled and you lie in bed at night and you think about it and you can't sleep and you wake up the next morning anxious, that is a trauma for you. So don't worry about what the professionals are putting into categories. Rather go, hold on. Remember at the beginning when I said it desensitizes your core stabilities? When you feel like your core has been shaken, that is something that is an indicator that goes, this may be a trauma for me, and I may need to reach out and get help. So we have about 15 to 20% of our population is highly sensitive. So it means that they really take in events. So for example, a child who is never invited to play with the other kids at recess or at lunch, that is a trauma for that child. And, we might have other people go, oh, that's not a real trauma, but it is for that child, because that child is holding it. If they're going to bed at night and going, I have no friends, nobody ever chooses me to play with them, that is a form of a trauma and needs to be worked through. So the moment we see that we've shook up, it's highly likely that it's connected to some sort of traumatic event for us.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you very much for, going in details into this topic. Thank you so much. You've done very well. Having to talk about this, the good thing about it is it could help mothers, parents in general, and it could save marriage as well, don't you think?
All the way across the lifespan. So it could help us with our relationships with spouses or with partners. It could help us with our children. It could help us stay connected as our children get older and we have to change our parenting style. It could help us if we become grandmas and grandpas one day. So all the way through, it just helps us again to be the very best version of ourselves, to be connected to others. That's one of the big things that trauma does too, is it disconnects us often because we become scared. So when we can be really connected with our friends, with our partners, with our children, we know that relationship is the biggest factor in lifelong happiness. And when we can't focus on those relationships when we've been through a traumatic event. So really, it gives us the gift of relationship with others.
I love that. I love that finishing over there. That is the key. When I was growing up, we didn't go to birthday parties. We didn't celebrate Christmas parties. That was trauma.
You've put it on the head there. Absolutely. 100%.
I just don't. And that has affected me that even now, if people are celebrating birthday parties, I just don't get so intrigued to celebrate my birthday party. I just love, and so.
And
so you've mentioned we have to work on it.
And then she said, Alicia, that's what I love, is we can enjoy it. You can do that parallel, which goes, this is my childhood and this is how it now impacts me. And I think that's hard for people sometimes to reflect on that and go, maybe that's why my marriage failed, like that gentleman you were talking about earlier. It's hard to reflect on that. Yeah. We're working with a group in Kenya at the moment who are wanting us to go to Kenya and do training with some of their psychologists there, because they don't have a lot of background in child psychology, and so they're having children come into the courts to provide a witness against someone who's perpetrated against them. And these children are going into the freeze mode, so they're not actually able to testify because they're in these courts that are scary, they're not child friendly. And so we're going in to go and try and educate their child psychologists, or to educate their psychologists there on how to work with children.
This is really good. You've ticked all the boxes. You have no idea what you've just mentioned. You are going to change the world.
I hope so.
Yes, you will. Trust me, you will. A lot of children has experienced a lot of things they can't really talk about. And you're going there just to educate. You're transforming that experience, the training, onto other psychologists to know how to use that on the children as well. So you're changing generations to generations. Thank you for that. Well done.
Thank you, Alicia.
Well done. All right, my darling. Thank you very much for your pleasant time. I'm so impressed with you spending quality time with me. And lastly, could you tell my audience here what's your website? Where can they find you? What is your social media? Please say where people can find you.
So if you just look up instituteofchildpsychology.com, we have a great website with tons of different online courses for parents and professionals. We're on Facebook. We have a very active Facebook page, and we're also on Instagram. So literally just search Institute of Child Psychology and you'll see us pop up.
Okay. Thank you very much, Tanya. The book you mentioned earlier, can you spell it out for me, please? I want to, because I'm going to write. Yeah.
You can actually look it up online. So it's a Bruce Perry, B-R-U-C-E.
B-R-U-C-E, yeah.
And then Perry, P-E-R-R-Y. So if you put in his name, his website will come up, and he's got books and free resources online. He's great.
Tanya, you are the superstar.
Thank you, Alicia. What a great way to start my day.
Thank you for putting a magical smile on my face.
Likewise. And I